The blood on the cabin floor wasn't hers. Yet. Lena Hart's finger froze on the trigger as two men kicked through the door, their shadows swallowing the last of the daylight. Behind her, a faded red wedding dress hung like a reminder of every promise the frontier had already broken. She'd come to Wyoming running from one kind of danger, only to find another had been waiting all along. But before we get to how she survived that moment, let me take you back to where it all began. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach hit another rut, and Lena's head cracked against the wooden frame hard enough to make her vision blur. She didn't complain. The three other passengers, a merchant who smelled like old tobacco, a preacher's wife clutching her Bible, and a young man who hadn't stopped staring since Cheyenne, had already decided she was trouble. Women traveling alone usually were. She pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched Wyoming roll past in shades of brown and gray. March had turned the landscape into something brutal. Mud, half-frozen streams, patches of dirty snow clinging to the shadows. Nothing like Boston. Nothing like the manicured gardens and gaslights and the suffocating weight of society watching every move she made. Nothing like the life she'd just destroyed. The merchant cleared his throat. "You got people waiting for you in Prescott, miss?" Lena didn't look at him. "Yes." "Family?" "Something like that." The preacher's wife made a small noise of disapproval. Lena ignored her too. She'd spent 23 years caring what people thought, measuring every word, every gesture, every breath against the impossible standard of being Marcus Whitmore's intended bride. The banking heir, the catch of the season, the man whose touch made her skin crawl. She'd left him standing at the altar 3 weeks ago. The scandal had probably killed her mother. Lena almost felt bad about that. Almost. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, throwing everyone forward. The driver's voice cut through from above. "Prescott Station. End of the line." Lena gathered her single carpet bag. She'd left everything else behind, including her name, and stepped down into ankle-deep mud. The town consisted of maybe 20 buildings scattered along a single rutted street. A mercantile, a saloon, a building that might have been a church or might have been someone's barn. The wind hit her face like a slap, carrying the smell of horses and wood smoke and something wild she couldn't name. The other passengers scattered quickly, like they couldn't get away from her fast enough. Lena stood alone in the street, suddenly aware that she had no idea what she was doing here. She had an address, a name, a letter she'd found in her dead sister's things 2 years after the funeral, a letter Charlotte had never sent, written to the man she'd married in secret before running away to Boston, before the fever took her, before any of it made sense. Caleb Voss. Box Canyon Ranch. Prescott, Wyoming territory. Lena had memorized every word Charlotte had written. "I made a mistake leaving. I think about the ranch every day. About you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Her sister had died without ever sending it, had died married to a man who never knew she was gone, had died keeping secrets that Lena was now unraveling like pulling thread from a torn seam. "You lost?" Lena turned. A man stood in the doorway of the mercantile, older, weathered, with eyes that had seen enough not to be surprised by much. She straightened her spine the way her mother had taught her. "I'm looking for Box Canyon Ranch. Caleb Voss." Something shifted in his expression, not quite surprise, more like recognition of a complication. "You're a long way from anywhere, miss." "I'm aware." He studied her for a moment. Her Boston clothes already mud-splattered, her impractical boots, the way she held herself like she was trying not to break. Then he sighed. "Ranch is about 8 miles northwest. There's a trail, well, less a trail, more a suggestion. But you won't make it before dark. Not on foot? Not in those shoes. I'll manage. You'll die." He said it matter of fact, the way someone might comment on the weather. "Cold comes down hard after sunset. You got no horse, no gear, and no sense from the look of it." Lena's jaw tightened. She'd heard variations of this her whole life. "You're too delicate, too sheltered, too much a lady to handle real life." Marcus had said it constantly, like it was a compliment. "Then I'll rent a horse." "Don't rent horses here." He scratched his jaw. "Listen, Caleb comes into town every couple weeks for supplies. He was here 3 days ago, so you're looking at maybe 10, 12 days before. I can't wait 12 days. Why not? Because Marcus Whitmore had money and connections and a vendetta? Because she'd humiliated him in front of Boston's entire social elite? Because men like him didn't let women just walk away? That's my business, Lena said. The merchant shrugged. Suit yourself? But if you're set on going tonight, talk to Eli Granger. Runs the stable. Might take you out there for the right price. He paused. Might try to charge you double that price on account of you being desperate and female. Don't let him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might not like what you find out there. Lana didn't ask what he meant. She was already walking toward the stable. Eli Granger was exactly the kind of man Lena had been warned about her entire life. The kind mothers pulled their daughters away from at garden parties. The kind who made fortunes on other people's weaknesses. He looked her up and down like she was livestock. Box Canyon, huh? He spat tobacco juice into the dirt. That's rough country. I'm willing to pay. I'm sure you are. Question is how much? Lena opened her handbag and pulled out the bills she'd taken from her mother's jewelry box. It was theft. She didn't care. $50. Granger's eyes widened slightly. Then he smiled, and Lena knew she'd made a mistake. She'd shown him she was desperate. 50 gets you halfway there, sweetheart. That road's dangerous. Wolves, bandits, all sorts of hazards for a woman traveling alone. He stepped closer. Now 100 might get you there safe. Or maybe we work out another arrangement. The lady said 50. The voice came from behind her, rough, quiet, carrying the weight of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. Lena turned. The man standing there looked like he'd been carved from the landscape itself. Tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate light. Dark hair longer than fashion allowed. A face that might have been handsome if it wasn't so completely devoid of anything resembling warmth. He wore a heavy coat stained with mud and what might have been blood, and his eyes were the color of smoke. Granger's expression went carefully neutral. Caleb, didn't know you were in town. I'm not. Caleb Voss looked at Lena. You coming to my ranch? She found her voice. Yes. Why? It was a fair question. Lena had rehearsed this moment 100 times during the long train ride west. She'd planned what to say, how to say it, the exact words that would make him understand. None of them came. Charlotte, she said instead. Charlotte Hart, she was... I know who she was. His voice went flat. You related? Her sister. Something flickered across his face. Too quick to read, too deep to be nothing. He looked at her for a long moment, and Lena felt suddenly exposed, like he could see through every lie she'd told, every secret she carried. You got a place to stay tonight? He asked. No. Hotel's closed, burned down last month. He seemed to be working through some internal calculation. There's a boarding house. Mrs. Chen runs it. Clean enough. I need to get to the ranch. Not tonight. I can't. Lena stopped herself. She'd already shown Granger she was desperate. She wouldn't show this man the same. I'd prefer to go tonight. Caleb's expression didn't change. It's near dark. Temperature'll drop below freezing. Trail's half mud, half ice. My horse is already tired from the ride in. He paused. You won't make it. I'm stronger than I look. You'd have to be. He turned to Granger. She's staying at Chen's. Put it on my account. Now hold on, Granger started. Caleb looked at him. Just looked. Granger shut up. Tomorrow morning, Caleb said to Lena. Sun up. Meet me here. He walked away before she could argue, disappearing into the gathering darkness like he'd never been there at all. Lena stood in the mud, her careful plans already unraveling, and wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. Mrs. Chen's boarding house smelled like lye soap and cabbage. The room was small, a narrow bed, a washstand, a single window that looked out on the alley where someone had left a broken wagon wheel to rust. Lena sat on the edge of the bed and tried not to cry. She'd made it this far. Across half a continent, away from everything she'd ever known, chasing a connection to a sister who'd been dead for 2 years, running from a man who would see her ruined rather than freed. And for what? To meet a stranger with dead eyes who looked at her like she was a problem he hadn't asked for? Charlotte had loved him. The letter had made that clear. The ranch is beautiful, harsh, but beautiful. Like him. Her sister had always been too romantic, seeing poetry where there was only dirt and struggle. But she'd been happy here, Lena was sure of it, until she'd left. Until she'd run back to Boston, back to the family that never understood her, back to the fever that killed her. Lena pulled out the letter now, unfolding it carefully. The paper was worn soft from reading, Charlotte's handwriting familiar as her own heartbeat. I made a mistake leaving. I think about the ranch every day, about you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm here, Lena whispered to the empty room. I came for both of us. She didn't know what she expected to find. Answers, maybe. Understanding. Some piece of Charlotte that still existed in this brutal landscape. Or maybe she was just running, the way Charlotte had run, from a life that didn't fit and never would. She lay down without undressing, too tired to care about propriety, and listened to the wind rattle the window. Tomorrow she'd meet Caleb Voss again. Tomorrow she'd see the place her sister had called home. Tomorrow everything would start making sense. She almost believed it. Caleb was already waiting when Lena arrived at the stable just after dawn. He'd saddled 2 horses, his and a smaller mare that looked at Lena with what might have been sympathy. You know how to ride? He asked. Yes. It was almost true. She'd ridden in Boston, careful loops around the park on a horse that knew the route better than she did. He didn't look convinced, but he helped her mount anyway. His hands on her waist were impersonal, efficient. The touch lasted less than 3 seconds, but Lena felt it like a brand. They rode in silence. The trail, if it could be called that, wound through country that seemed designed to punish human ambition. Rocky slopes gave way to narrow valleys, half-frozen streams cutting through land that looked like it had never been gentle. The sky was the color of old bruises, heavy with weather that hadn't decided whether to be rain or snow. Lena's thighs started aching within the first mile. By the second mile, her hands were numb despite her gloves. She didn't complain. She'd rather die than complain. Caleb rode ahead, his back straight, his attention on the landscape. He didn't look back to check if she was keeping up. Somehow that was worse than if he'd been watching her struggle. Charlotte never mentioned a sister, he said finally. She wouldn't have. Why not? Because Charlotte had spent her whole life trying to become someone else, someone who didn't carry the weight of their family's expectations. Because she'd wanted to start over, clean slate, no history. We weren't close, Lena said. It was easier than the truth. But you came all this way. I found her letter, the one she never sent. It seemed important. Caleb was quiet for so long Lena thought he wouldn't respond. Then, she left 3 years ago, showed up one morning, said she was going back east, family emergency. I never heard from her again. She died 6 months later. His shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. I know. How? Lawyer sent papers, notifying me, legal stuff. He paused. We were married. Did you know that? Lena's throat went tight. I suspected. It wasn't official, some traveling preacher, probably drunk, but it counted to us, for a while. He stopped his horse abruptly, turning to look at her directly for the first time since they'd started riding. Why are you really here? The question hung between them, sharp as broken glass. Lena could tell him about Marcus, about running, about needing a place to hide where Boston's reach didn't extend. She could tell him about the guilt of not knowing her sister, about trying to understand the choices Charlotte had made. I don't know, she said instead. I didn't have anywhere else to go. It was the most honest thing she'd said since arriving. Caleb held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once. Fair enough. They rode on. Box Canyon Ranch appeared suddenly, tucked into a valley between 2 ridges, like the land was trying to hide it. The main house was small, logs and stone, built low against the wind. There was a barn, a corral, a few outbuildings that looked like they'd been there since before Wyoming was even a territory. And everywhere, cattle. Hundreds of them, dark shapes scattered across the brown grass, moving slowly like they had nowhere better to be. Caleb dismounted and tied his horse. Lena climbed down less gracefully, her legs trembling from the ride. She stood in the yard looking at the place her sister had lived, trying to find some trace of Charlotte in the rough timber and the endless wind. "Barn's through there," Caleb said, pointing. "Chickens in the coop need feeding morning and evening. Well, pump sometimes freezes. You have to pour hot water on it first. Outhouse is behind the cabin, downwind if you're lucky." Lena stared at him. "I don't understand. Ranch doesn't run itself. You want me to work? You want to stay, you work. That's the deal. I didn't agree to any deal. Then you can head back to town." He started walking toward the barn, dismissing her. "I'll take you tomorrow morning." Lena's hands clenched. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She'd imagined, what, welcome, understanding, some kind of connection to the sister she'd lost. "I can't go back," she said. Caleb stopped. "Why not?" "Because Marcus would find her eventually. Because she'd burned every bridge in Boston. Because she had nowhere else to run." "I just can't." He turned around slowly. "You in trouble?" "Nothing that'll follow me here." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I'm giving." They stood facing each other across the muddy yard, two strangers connected by a ghost. Caleb's expression was unreadable, but Lena saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. Whatever he was thinking, she couldn't afford for him to decide she was more trouble than she was worth. "I'll work," she said. "Whatever you need. I'll learn." "You ever worked a day in your life?" "No." At least he didn't look surprised. "You'll slow me down. Then I'll work faster. You'll quit within a week." "I won't." Caleb studied her, her expensive clothes now ruined, her soft hands that had never held anything heavier than a teacup, the stubborn set of her jaw that probably reminded him of Charlotte. That had to be it. The only reason he hadn't sent her back already. "1 month," he said finally. "You can stay 1 month. After that, we'll see." It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. Lena nodded. 1 month. "Cabin's unlocked. Take the room on the left. Don't touch anything in the other room." He walked away before she could ask which room was Charlotte's, leaving Lena standing alone in a place that was already starting to feel like a mistake. The cabin was sparse. Main room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, kitchen area with a cast iron stove that looked like it had seen better decades. 2 bedrooms, both small. The room on the left held a narrow bed and not much else. The room on the right, Charlotte's room, was closed. Lena stood in the doorway of her new room and tried not to feel the weight of the silence. No gas lights, no running water, no maid to help her dress, no cook to prepare meals, no mother to tell her she was doing everything wrong. Just wind and cold, and the sound of cattle lowing somewhere in the distance. She unpacked her single bag. 2 dresses, both impractical, some undergarments, a hairbrush, the letter. That was it. Her entire life reduced to what she could carry. There was a knock at the front door. Lena opened it to find Caleb holding a bundle of clothes. "These might fit," he said. They were Charlotte's. Work clothes. Lena took them carefully. Canvas pants, heavy shirt, a coat lined with sheepskin, boots that looked like they'd actually withstand mud. "Thank you." He nodded and turned to leave. "Caleb." He paused. "Why are you letting me stay? Really?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he looked at her with those smoke-colored eyes and said, "Because she asked me to. In the letter you found, she asked me to take care of her family if anything happened to her." His jaw tightened. "I failed her when it mattered, not making that mistake twice." He left her standing there, holding her dead sister's clothes, trying to understand how someone could carry that much guilt and still keep breathing. The first week nearly killed her. Lena had thought she understood what hard work meant. She'd been wrong. Ranch work wasn't hard, it was brutal, endless, designed to break anyone soft enough to break. She woke before dawn because that's when Caleb woke, and standing around while he worked made her feel useless. She fed the chickens and collected eggs, fumbling with the process until she figured out that the hens weren't actually trying to kill her, they just acted like it. She learned to work the well pump, cursing when her fingers stuck to the frozen metal. She learned to split wood, though her aim was terrible, and she nearly took her own foot off twice. She learned to cook on the cast iron stove, burning everything at first, then gradually figuring out the rhythm of heat and timing. Caleb watched it all with the emotional investment of someone observing weather. He didn't offer help unless she was about to seriously injure herself. He didn't offer encouragement. He just worked, silent and efficient, moving through his day like she wasn't there. It should have made her angry. Instead, it made her determined. On the third day, she tried to help move a group of cattle from one pasture to another. The horse, the same mare from the ride out, seemed to understand that Lena had no idea what she was doing. The cattle definitely understood. They scattered like she was a predator, making more work for Caleb to round them back up. He didn't yell. That would have been easier. He just looked at her and said, "Stay at the cabin tomorrow." Lena's face burned. "I can learn." "Not on my time." She wanted to argue, but he was right. She was slowing him down, making his already difficult work harder. So she nodded and went back to the cabin, where she spent the next day scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing just to feel like she was doing something useful. That night, Caleb brought in a rabbit he'd shot. He cleaned it outside, then brought the meat in and started cooking. Lena watched, trying to memorize the process. "You don't have to cook for me," she said. "You'll starve otherwise." "I'm getting better. You burned water yesterday. That's not physically possible." "You managed it anyway." He almost smiled. Almost. Charlotte couldn't cook either when she first got here. It was the first time he'd mentioned Charlotte voluntarily. Lena held very still, afraid any movement would make him stop talking. "She tried to make biscuits," he continued. "Used salt instead of sugar. Didn't realize until I bit into one." The ghost of that almost smile again. She laughed so hard she cried. I'd never seen anyone laugh at their own mistakes like that. "She was always like that," Lena said softly. Nothing ever rattled her. Not really. Something did eventually. "What?" But Caleb had already retreated back into silence, the moment gone as quickly as it had come. They ate in quiet, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside. Lena's entire body ached from work she still didn't know how to do properly. Her hands were blistered, her shoulders screamed, her pride was in tatters. But she was still here. That had to count for something. The second week, something shifted. Lena stopped trying to prove herself and started trying to actually learn. She watched how Caleb moved through his work, economical, purposeful, wasting no motion. She started asking questions instead of pretending she understood. She stopped being afraid of looking incompetent because she was obviously incompetent, and pretending otherwise just made things worse. Caleb, surprisingly, started answering. "Cattle need checking every day," he explained while they rode the fence line. "Weather turns, they bunch up in the draws, and you can lose a dozen before you know they're in trouble." "How do you know where to look?" "You learn the land, where water runs, where wind breaks, where they feel safe." He pointed to a cluster of cows huddled against a rock outcropping. "Like that. North wind's coming. They knew before we did." Lena filed away every piece of information like her life depended on it. Maybe it did. She learned to read the sky for weather, to check the cattle for injury or illness, to mend fence, though her knots were terrible, to ride without thinking about every movement, letting the horse do most of the work. She learned the rhythm of the ranch, the early mornings, the long days, the exhaustion that made sleep come easy despite the hard mattress and the cold that crept through the cabin walls. And slowly, carefully, she learned about Caleb. He was 32, though he looked older. He'd come to Wyoming 6 years ago, bought the land with money saved from working mines in Colorado. He'd built the cabin himself. The ranch ran on credit and stubbornness. Cattle prices were down, winter had been hard, and he was one bad season away from losing everything. He never said any of this directly. Lena pieced it together from fragments, comments made while working, papers left on the table, the careful way he measured out supplies like every ounce mattered. Charlotte had lived here for almost a year before she left. Caleb never said why she'd gone, and Lena didn't ask. Some questions had answers that hurt too much to hear, but she wondered. Late at night, lying in bed listening to the wind, she wondered what had driven her sister away from this place, this man, this hard, simple life. And she wondered if she was about to make the same mistake. On the 15th day, the blizzard hit. It came out of nowhere, or rather, Caleb had been predicting it for 2 days, reading signs in the air that Lena couldn't see. They'd spent the previous day moving cattle closer to the barn, stockpiling wood, preparing for weather that Lena had assumed he was exaggerating. She'd been wrong. The snow started just after dawn, light at first, then building into something that turned the world white. Wind drove it horizontal, making it impossible to see more than a few feet. Temperature dropped so fast Lena could feel it happening, like the air itself was freezing solid. "We've got about 60 head still in the north pasture," Caleb said, already pulling on his heavy coat. "If they're not brought in, they'll die." "In this?" Lena looked out the window at what was basically a wall of white. "Especially in this." He was checking his rifle, loading it with the careful precision of someone who'd done this before. "You stay here. Keep the fire going. If I'm not back by dark, I'm coming with you." "No." "You can't do it alone." "I've done it before." "And if you fall, get hurt, get lost?" Lena was already reaching for Charlotte's heavy coat. "You'll die out there and I'll freeze here, and the cattle will die anyway. Let me help." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. She could see him calculating odds, weighing her inexperience against the reality of the situation. Finally, he nodded. "Stay close. If you lose sight of me, stop moving and yell. Don't try to find your way back alone." "Understood. And if I tell you to do something, you do it. No questions, no arguments." "Yes." He handed her a rope. "Tie this around your waist. I'll do the same. If the visibility gets worse, we'll be connected." They went out into the storm. It was like stepping into another world, one made entirely of cold and wind and white. The snow stung Lena's face, worked its way into every gap in her clothes. She could barely see Caleb 5 feet ahead of her, could barely hear his voice over the wind. They rode toward the north pasture, the horses struggling through snow that was already knee-deep in places. Lena had never been so cold in her life. Her fingers went numb despite her gloves. Her face felt like it was burning and freezing simultaneously. But she kept going. The cattle were huddled in a tight group against the far fence, already half covered in snow. Getting them moving was brutal work. Lena found herself yelling herself hoarse, pushing the reluctant animals toward the barn, slipping in the snow, getting back up, pushing again. Caleb worked like a machine, tireless, methodical. When one of the calves went down, he dismounted and physically lifted it, carrying it until it could walk again. When the herd tried to turn back, he cut them off, forcing them forward through sheer determination. Lena had never seen anything like it. Hours passed, maybe 3, maybe 5. Time stopped meaning anything in the endless white. Lena's entire world narrowed to the next step, the next push, the next moment of staying upright and breathing. They finally got the cattle into the barn just as true darkness fell. Caleb secured the doors while Lena stood shaking, too cold to move, too exhausted to think. "Inside," Caleb said. "Now." The cabin felt like a different universe. Warm, still, quiet except for the wind battering the walls. Lena stood dripping snowmelt onto the floor, unable to make her hands work well enough to remove her coat. Caleb helped her, his movements gentle, efficient. He got her coat off, her boots, guided her to the chair closest to the fire. Then he disappeared and came back with a blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. "You did good," he said quietly. Lena looked up at him. This man who'd spent the last 2 weeks treating her like a tolerable inconvenience. His face was windburned, his eyes tired, but there was something different in the way he looked at her now. Respect, maybe. Recognition. "I didn't quit," she said through chattering teeth. "No, you didn't." He almost smiled again, that ghost of expression that made her wonder what he'd been like before grief carved him down to essentials. Charlotte would have quit. She was smart like that. She would have stayed. No, she knew her limits. That was her strength. Caleb moved to the stove, started heating water. "You don't know yours yet. That makes you either brave or stupid." "Probably stupid. Probably." They sat in companionable silence while the storm raged outside and the fire burned down to coals. Lena felt something loosening in her chest, some knot of tension she'd been carrying since Boston, since the wedding that wasn't, since the moment she decided to run. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about Marcus, wasn't looking over her shoulder, wasn't wondering when her past would catch up with her. She was just here, present, alive. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. The storm lasted 3 days. They were trapped inside together, the world beyond the cabin reduced to howling wind and endless white. Caleb worked on mending tack and equipment. Lena attempted to cook, with mixed but improving results. They talked in fragments, not conversations exactly, more like pieces of information exchanged when the silence grew too heavy. She learned that he'd grown up in Missouri, left home at 16, worked his way west doing whatever jobs would have him, that he'd never planned to be a rancher, had fallen into it almost by accident, that he'd thought about leaving Wyoming 100 times but never had. He learned that she'd grown up in Boston society, that she'd been engaged to a man she didn't love, that she'd run rather than live a life that felt like slowly suffocating. He didn't ask why she'd really come to the ranch. She didn't ask why Charlotte had really left. Some truths were too complicated for 3 days snowed in together. On the 4th morning, the storm broke. Lena woke to silence, real silence, not just a pause between gusts. She got up and looked out the window to find the world transformed. Everything was white, clean, new. The sun was rising over the eastern ridge, turning the snow pink and gold. It was beautiful. She heard Caleb moving in the other room, getting ready to check the livestock, to dig out from the storm's aftermath. The work would be brutal, days of it probably. Clearing paths, checking cattle, making sure nothing had been lost or damaged beyond repair. But standing there in the early light, Lena felt something she hadn't expected. She felt ready. A month ago, she'd been a different person, soft, sheltered, afraid of everything she'd been taught to fear. Now her hands were calloused, her muscles ached from real work, and she could face a blizzard without breaking. Charlotte had lived here for a year and left. Lena had been here barely 2 weeks and couldn't imagine leaving. Maybe that meant she was stronger than her sister, or maybe it just meant she had nowhere else to go. Either way, she was staying, at least until Caleb decided otherwise. She dressed in Charlotte's work clothes, they fit her now, her body already changing from the hard labor, and went out to face whatever came next. Caleb was in the barn, checking on the cattle they'd saved. He looked up when she came in, snow shovel in hand. "Thought you might sleep in," he said. "Too much work to do." He nodded, accepting this. "Roof on the chicken coop probably collapsed under the snow weight. We'll need to dig it out, shore it up. Show me how." They worked side by side as the sun climbed higher, turning the frozen landscape into something almost bearable. And if Lena noticed the way Caleb's expression had softened slightly when he looked at her, the way his instructions came easier now, the way he seemed less like he was waiting for her to quit and more like he was teaching her to stay, well, she didn't say anything about it. Some things were better left unspoken, at least for now. The chicken coop roof had collapsed exactly as Caleb predicted. Lena stood looking at the wreckage, splintered wood half buried in snow, chickens huddled miserably in what remained of their shelter, and felt a strange satisfaction that at least one thing today was going according to plan, even if that plan involved more backbreaking work. "We'll need to clear the snow first," Caleb said, already moving, "then pull out the broken beams before they crush what's left." They worked for hours. Lena's shoulders burned from shoveling, her back screaming with each twist and lift. The chickens, ungrateful as always, scattered and squawked like she was the one who'd destroyed their home. By the time they'd cleared enough space to assess the damage, the sun was high and Lena's clothes were soaked through with sweat despite the cold. "It's worse than I thought," Caleb said, crouching to examine the main support beam. It had cracked clean through, probably rotted before the snow even hit. "We'll have to rebuild the whole structure." "How long will that take?" "With 2 of us? 3, maybe 4 days." He stood, brushing snow from his knees. "With just me, a week." Lena heard what he wasn't saying, that she'd proven herself enough to be counted as real help now. Something warm spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. "Then we'd better get started," she said. They spent the rest of the day salvaging what wood they could and measuring out what they'd need to cut fresh. Caleb worked with the quiet efficiency she'd come to recognize, but there was something different now. He showed her how to check wood for rot, how to measure twice before cutting, how to fit joints together so they'd hold under weight. He wasn't just letting her help, he was teaching her. That night, over a dinner of beans and the last of the salt pork, Caleb said, "You've been here 3 weeks." Lena looked up from her plate. "Has it been that long?" "Month's almost up." "Right, the deadline. 1 month," he'd said, then they'd see. Her stomach tightened. She'd been so focused on the daily work, on learning and surviving and not thinking about Boston, that she'd almost forgotten this was temporary. "I can stay longer?" She tried to keep her voice neutral, like the answer didn't matter much either way. Caleb was quiet for a moment, studying his coffee cup like it held answers. "Ranch could use the help, if you're willing." "I'm willing." "It won't get easier. Winter's just starting. We've got months of hard weather ahead." "I know. And I can't pay you much. Maybe $20 a month once spring comes and I can sell some cattle." $20. In Boston, she'd spent more than that on a single hat without thinking twice. Now it sounded like a fortune. "That's fine," Lena said. Caleb nodded slowly. "All right then. You can stay." It wasn't much of a celebration. No handshake, no formal agreement. Just two people acknowledging that an arrangement was working well enough to continue. But Lena felt something settle in her chest, a kind of peace she hadn't known she was looking for. She had a place now. Not forever, maybe, but for now. That was more than she'd had 3 weeks ago. The next morning, they started rebuilding the coop. Caleb cut the larger beams while Lena worked on the smaller support pieces, measuring and cutting with increasing confidence. Her hands had blistered and healed and blistered again, developing calluses that would have horrified her mother. She found she didn't care. "Charlotte hated this part," Caleb said suddenly, startling Lena. He rarely mentioned her sister unprompted. "The building. She said it was boring." "What did she like?" "The horses, the riding." He fitted a beam into place, testing its stability. "She was good with them, patient. They trusted her." Lena tried to picture her sister here, working alongside this quiet man, finding joy in something as simple as horses. It didn't quite fit with the Charlotte she remembered, the one who'd been restless in Boston, always searching for something she couldn't name. "Why did she leave?" Lena asked before she could stop herself. Caleb's hands stilled. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I don't know. She said it was family business, emergency, that she'd be back in a few weeks." His voice went flat. "She wasn't." "Did you try to find her?" "Got as far as Cheyenne. Trail went cold. I had the ranch to run, cattle to tend. Couldn't just leave everything." He picked up his hammer again, driving nails with more force than necessary. "By the time I could have gone further, I figured if she wanted to be found, she would have written. But she had written, just never sent the letter." Lena thought about Charlotte's words. "I made a mistake leaving. I think about the ranch every day." And wondered what had stopped her sister from coming back. Pride? Fear? Or had she simply run out of time? "She talked about you, Lena said quietly. "Near the end, when the fever got bad. She kept saying she needed to go home, but I didn't know she meant here. I thought she was confused." Caleb's jaw tightened. "She was sick long?" 3 weeks. The doctors tried everything." "She suffered?" Lena thought about those final days, Charlotte's skin burning hot, her breathing labored, the way she'd gripped Lena's hand like she was drowning. "Yes." He nodded once, accepting this. Then he went back to work, and Lena knew the conversation was over. They finished the coop 2 days later. It wasn't beautiful, but it was solid, and the chickens seemed grudgingly accepting of their new home. Lena stood back, looking at something she'd helped build with her own hands, and felt a ridiculous surge of pride. "Not bad," Caleb said. Coming from him, it was practically a parade. "Only took us 3 days of constant work and minor injuries. That's ranching." He was almost smiling again. "Most things here take longer than you think and hurt more than you expect." Cheerful. Honest. They walked back to the cabin together, the sun already dropping toward the western ridge. The days were getting shorter now, winter settling in with serious intent. Lena had heard stories about Wyoming winters, about people freezing to death between their house and barn, about cattle losses so bad they bankrupted ranchers, about the kind of cold that made you question whether spring was even real. She should have been scared. Instead, she felt almost excited, like this was a test she could finally pass. That night, while Caleb was out checking the livestock one last time, Lena opened the door to Charlotte's room for the first time. She'd been avoiding it for weeks, uncertain what she'd find, uncertain if she had the right to look. But curiosity finally won over respect for the dead. The room was small, like hers. A bed, a dresser, a trunk at the foot of the bed. On the dresser sat a hairbrush and a small mirror. Nothing else. It could have been anyone's room. Lena sat on the bed, it creaked under her weight, and looked around, trying to find some trace of her sister in this spare space. But Charlotte had left almost nothing behind. No clothes in the dresser, no personal items in the trunk. Just emptiness. Except, Lena noticed something under the bed. A box, pushed far back against the wall. She pulled it out, her heart beating faster. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Charlotte in Boston, all returned unopened. Caleb's handwriting, rough but careful. Lena picked one up, dated 6 months after Charlotte had left. I don't know if you're getting these. I don't know if you want to, but I keep writing anyway because I don't know what else to do. She put it down quickly, feeling like she'd stumbled onto something private. But she couldn't help noticing the dates on the other letters, one every week for almost a year. All returned, all saved. He tried to find her, he'd tried to reach her. Charlotte had never responded. Why? The door opened. Lena shoved the box back under the bed and stood up quickly, guilty as a thief. Caleb stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Thought you were in bed. I was just... Lena gestured helplessly. I wanted to see her room. Find anything? She could tell him about the letters, about the evidence that he'd cared more than he admitted, that Charlotte had ignored his attempts to reconcile. But looking at his face, carefully blank, guarded, she realized he already knew. He'd saved those letters for a reason. No, Lena said. Nothing. He nodded. You should get some sleep. Early start tomorrow. Caleb, good night, Lena. He left, closing the door behind him. Lena stood alone in her sister's empty room and tried to understand what kind of pain could make a person write to someone who never wrote back. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. They rose before dawn, worked until dark, ate simple meals in comfortable silence. The weather turned properly brutal, snow almost daily, temperatures that made exposed skin ache, wind that never stopped. Lena learned to dress in layers, to move quickly between buildings, to read the sky for warnings. She also learned that Caleb was teaching her more than just ranch work. He showed her how to shoot, setting up targets behind the barn, and patiently correcting her grip, her stance, her breathing. She was terrible at first, flinching every time the rifle kicked, missing by feet instead of inches. You're thinking too much, he said. Just aim and squeeze. Don't anticipate the shot. Easy for you to say. Try again. She did. This time the bullet hit the edge of the target, not the center, but close enough to count. Better? Caleb said. Keep practicing. Why do I need to know this? He looked at her seriously. Because sometimes I have to go to town, or check the far pastures, and you'll be here alone. He paused. You need to be able to protect yourself. Lena thought about the isolation of the ranch, miles from the nearest neighbor, hours from town, completely alone if something went wrong. She'd never considered what that meant. What could happen? What am I protecting myself from? Wolves, coyotes, sometimes bears, though they're mostly denned up by now. Caleb reloaded the rifle. And sometimes people. People? Drifters, prospectors down on their luck, men who see a woman alone and get ideas. His voice went hard. It doesn't happen often, but it happens. Lena remembered the way Eli Granger had looked at her that first day in town, the calculation in his eyes, the way he'd stepped closer, assuming she was prey. Show me again, she said. They practiced until her shoulder ached from the recoil and her hands were numb from the cold. By the end, she could hit the target more often than not. Not perfect, but good enough. You'll do, Caleb said. Just remember, if you have to shoot, shoot to kill. Warning shots are for people who can afford to miss. That night, Lena cleaned the rifle and kept it near her bed. She hoped she'd never need it, but she was glad to know it was there. December arrived with the vengeance. The wind shifted north and stayed there, bringing cold that felt personal, like it was targeting her specifically. The water in the wash basin froze overnight. The windows developed frost patterns on the inside. Going to the outhouse became an act of courage. But Lena adapted. She learned to appreciate small warmths, the heat of the stove, hot coffee in the morning, coming inside after hours in the cold, and feeling her fingers slowly thaw. She learned to find beauty in the harsh landscape, the way morning sun turned ice crystals into diamonds, the absolute silence after fresh snow, the northern lights dancing green and purple across the night sky. She also learned that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined, not just physically, though her body had changed, leaner, harder, capable of work that would have left her bedridden a month ago. But mentally, she could face difficulty now without breaking, could solve problems instead of waiting for someone else to solve them, could stand on her own. One morning in mid-December, Caleb announced he needed to go to town for supplies. "I'll be gone 2 days," he said over breakfast. "Maybe 3 if the weather turns. You'll be all right here?" Lena's first instinct was to say no, to ask him to wait, to not leave her alone in the middle of nowhere with winter howling outside. But she pushed the fear down. "I'll be fine. Plenty of firewood stacked, enough food, rifles loaded." He was watching her carefully, looking for signs of panic. "You know how to handle the stock." "I know. If something goes wrong, it won't." He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "All right. I'll be back before you know it." He left an hour later, riding toward town with saddlebags empty and a list of supplies they needed. Lena stood in the doorway and watched him disappear over the eastern ridge, trying not to feel like she was being abandoned. The first day alone was fine. She kept busy with chores, feeding chickens, checking the cattle, hauling water, splitting more firewood just to have something to do. The work kept her mind occupied, kept the silence from becoming oppressive. The second day was harder. The routine was the same, but the solitude started to weigh on her. She'd grown used to Caleb's presence, not conversation exactly, but the comfort of another person nearby. The cabin felt too empty without him, too quiet. That night, she lay in bed listening to the wind and thought about Marcus. She hadn't let herself think about him in weeks, had pushed Boston so far back in her mind, it felt like someone else's life. But alone in the dark, the memories crept back. He'd be furious by now, humiliated. Men like him didn't tolerate being jilted, especially not publicly. He'd look for her. Of course he would. His pride demanded it. But would he find her? Could he even imagine she'd run somewhere like this? To the middle of Wyoming? To a ranch with no telegraph? To a life so foreign to everything they'd known that it might as well be another country? Probably not. Marcus thought in terms of cities, society, places where money and influence mattered. He'd never understand that someone could choose this. Lena hoped that ignorance would keep her safe. She finally fell asleep sometime after midnight, the rifle still within reach. The sound of horses woke her just before dawn. Multiple horses, moving fast. Lena's eyes snapped open, her heart immediately racing. Caleb wouldn't return with company, and neighbors didn't visit at dawn. She grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, staying low. In the gray pre-dawn light, she could see 2 riders approaching the cabin. They didn't look like ranchers. Their clothes were too fine, their posture too urban. One of them carried what looked like a badge. Law. Lena's blood went cold. Had Marcus sent them? Was she about to be dragged back to Boston to face whatever legal fiction he'd invented to justify pursuing her? The men dismounted. The one with the badge knocked on the door, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the cabin like gunshots. "Anyone home?" "This is Deputy Marshal Graves." Lena's mind raced. She could hide, pretend no one was here, but they'd seen smoke from the chimney, evidence that someone was home. Running would make her look guilty of something. She took a breath, steadied herself, and opened the door with the rifle pointed at the ground, but ready. "Can I help you?" Deputy Marshal Graves was in his 40s, weathered but professional. His companion was younger, nervous, his hand resting on his sidearm. Graves took in Lena's appearance, Charlotte's work clothes, the rifle, the defensive posture, and his expression shifted to something almost apologetic. Sorry to disturb you, miss. We're looking for Caleb Voss. He's not here. When do you expect him back? Tomorrow. Maybe the day after. Lena kept her voice level. What's this about? Graves hesitated, then said, There's been some trouble in town. Cattle rustling. We're talking to all the ranchers in the area. Relief flooded through her so suddenly she almost laughed. Not Marcus, not Boston, just regular frontier crime. Mr. Voss went to town for supplies 2 days ago, Lena said. You probably passed him on the trail. We came up from the south. Graves was studying her with professional interest. You live here, miss. I work here. By yourself? She heard the implication. A woman alone on an isolated ranch was unusual enough to be suspicious. Mr. Voss hired me to help with the stock. I'm his sister-in-law. It was the first time she'd claimed that relationship out loud. Technically, it wasn't even a lie. Charlotte had been married to Caleb, which made them related by marriage, even if the marriage had never been properly legal and Charlotte was dead. Graves seemed to accept it. Well, when he gets back, tell him we need to talk. Some of the missing cattle had his brand. His cattle were stolen? That's what we're trying to determine. He touched his hat brim. Sorry again for the intrusion, ma'am. You be careful out here alone. They rode away, leaving Lena standing in the doorway with her heart still pounding. She watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then went inside and locked the door. It took an hour for the adrenaline to fade. When it did, Lena felt shaky and stupid. She'd panicked over nothing, had immediately assumed the worst. Marcus wasn't looking for her. No one was. She was safe here. She hoped. Caleb returned late that afternoon, his saddlebags full of supplies and his expression grim. Lena helped him unload, then told him about the marshal's visit. They think someone stole your cattle? Probably did. Caleb carried a sack of flour inside. Been losing animals all fall. 3, 4 at a time. Small enough I couldn't prove it wasn't just predators or bad luck. But you knew. I knew. He started putting supplies away with sharp movements. Rustlers work that way. Take a few head from multiple ranches, sell them over the territorial line where the brands don't mean anything. By the time you notice, they're long gone. Can the marshal stop them? Maybe, if he can catch them. Caleb didn't sound optimistic. More likely he'll file a report and nothing will happen. That's not right. No, but it's how things work out here. Laws spread thin. Justice is something you mostly have to handle yourself. Lena thought about that while she made dinner, the idea that right and wrong weren't enforced by courts and police but by individual action. It should have scared her. Instead, it felt almost honest. At least here, people didn't pretend civilization had all the answers. They ate in silence, both lost in thought. Finally, Caleb said, You did all right while I was gone. The marshal scared me. You handled it. I thought... Lena stopped, unsure how much to reveal. I thought they might be looking for me. Caleb's eyes sharpened. Why would they be looking for you? This was it. The moment to tell him the truth about Marcus, about running, about the very real possibility that she'd brought trouble to his doorstep. But looking at his face, already dealing with rustlers and failing cattle prices and another brutal winter, she couldn't add her problems to his burden. No reason, she said. Just paranoia. He didn't look convinced, but he let it drop. You need to tell me if trouble's coming. I can't protect you if I don't know what I'm protecting you from. There's no trouble. Lena, I promise, no trouble. It was a lie. But sometimes lies were kinder than truth. The next week passed without incident. They fell back into routine, work, meals, sleep, repeat. But something had shifted. Caleb was more watchful now, riding the property line more often, checking for signs of rustlers. Lena found herself looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, unable to shake the feeling that something was coming. On Christmas Eve, not that either of them mentioned it, they were working in the barn when Caleb suddenly went still. What is it? Lena asked. Smoke. West Ridge. She looked where he was pointing. A thin column of gray rose against the evening sky, maybe 2 miles away. Could be campers, Caleb said slowly. Prospectors. Travelers. Or rustlers. Or rustlers. He was already moving, checking his rifle. Stay here. Lock the cabin door. Don't open it for anyone but me. You're going alone? Can't leave the ranch unprotected. Then I'll come with you. No. Caleb. He turned to face her, his expression harder than she'd ever seen it. This isn't a debate. You stay here. If I'm not back by morning, ride to town and get the marshal. Understand? Lena wanted to argue, but she saw the fear beneath his anger, not for himself, but for her. He was protecting her the only way he knew how. Be careful, she said instead. Always am. He rode out into the gathering darkness, leaving Lena alone with her racing thoughts and the rifle he'd made her practice with. She went to the cabin, locked the door, and settled in to wait. The hours crawled past. Lena tried to stay calm, tried to tell herself Caleb knew what he was doing, but every sound outside made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. Midnight came and went. No Caleb. 1 in the morning. 2. Lena kept the fire burning, the rifle across her lap, her ears straining for the sound of hoofbeats. 3 o'clock. Still nothing. At 4, she heard horses approaching, multiple horses. She moved to the window, her hands shaking, trying to see through the darkness. 3 riders, but only one of them sat upright. The other 2 slumped in their saddles like... The door burst open. Lena spun, bringing the rifle up, finger on the trigger. 2 men stood in the doorway, strangers, rough-looking, with eyes that assessed her like she was something to be taken. Well, the first one said, grinning, looks like we found ourselves a bonus. The rifle trembled in Lena's hands, but she didn't lower it. And somewhere in the distance, she could hear more horses coming. But whether they were salvation or just more danger, she had no way of knowing. The first man took a step inside, and Lena's finger tightened on the trigger. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely keep the rifle steady, but she forced her voice to sound calm. That's far enough. He stopped, raising his hands in mock surrender. Easy now. We don't mean no harm. Then turn around and leave. Can't do that. The second man moved to flank her, circling toward the kitchen. See, we had a disagreement with the man of the house. Things got a little heated. Lena's blood went cold. Where is he? Caleb? Oh, he's having himself a rest. Took a pretty good knock to the head. The first man grinned, showing missing teeth. He'll wake up eventually, probably. The world narrowed to the rifle in her hands and the 2 men closing in on her. Lena had practiced shooting at targets. Still, silent, predictable. She'd never pointed a gun at a living person. Never imagined having to decide in split seconds whether to kill or be killed. I will shoot you, she said, and was surprised to hear her voice steady. With that? The first man laughed. Honey, you're shaking so hard you couldn't hit the wall. He was right. Her hands trembled. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear anything else. But she remembered what Caleb had taught her. Breathe, aim, squeeze, don't think, just do. The man took another step. Lena fired. The shot went wide, punching a hole through the wall 2 feet to his left. The sound was deafening in the small cabin, and both men froze. Next one won't miss, Lena said, trying to work the bolt action the way Caleb had shown her. Her hands fumbled, slipping on the metal. The second man recovered first. She don't know how to reload. Get her, Jack. They both rushed her at once. Lena got the bolt chambered and fired again. This time, pure luck guided the bullet. It caught the first man in the shoulder, spinning him around. He screamed, clutching the wound, blood already seeping between his fingers. The second man grabbed for the rifle. Lena held on, fighting for control, but he was bigger and stronger, and she was running on terror and adrenaline. He wrenched it from her hands and threw it across the room. You bitch! The wounded man was on his feet, his face twisted with rage and pain. You shot me! Lena backed toward the fireplace, her mind racing. The poker. She could reach the poker. It wasn't much, but it was something. Her hand closed around the iron handle just as the second man lunged. She swung wildly, catching him across the forearm. He yelped and stumbled back. Shoot her, damn it! The wounded man yelled. The second man pulled his pistol. Lena saw him raise it, saw his finger on the trigger, and in that moment she understood she was about to die. All the running, all the fighting, all the impossible hope that she could build a new life. It was ending here, in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, at the hands of men whose names she didn't even know. The door exploded inward. Caleb came through like winter itself had taken human form, silent, unstoppable, absolutely lethal. Blood ran down the side of his face from a gash near his temple, but his eyes were clear and cold as he raised his rifle. The first shot took the gun from the second man's hand, the bullet passing so close it left a burn mark across his palm. The man screamed and dropped the weapon. The second shot punched a hole in the floor 6 inches from the wounded man's foot. "Move again, and the next one's through your skull," Caleb said quietly. Both men froze. Caleb moved into the cabin, keeping the rifle trained on them. His gaze flicked to Lena for just a second, taking in her disheveled state, the terror still etched on her face. The poker still clutched in her white-knuckled grip. "You hurt?" he asked. Lena shook her head. She didn't trust her voice. "Good." He looked back at the men. "On your knees, hands behind your heads." They obeyed, the wounded man whimpering as the movement pulled at his shoulder. Caleb kept the rifle steady with one hand and reached for the rope hanging near the door with the other. "Lena, I need you to tie their hands." She moved like she was underwater, everything slow and dreamlike. The poker clattered to the floor. She took the rope from Caleb with numb fingers and approached the men carefully, half expecting them to lunge again. "Make it tight," Caleb said. "They try anything, step back and I'll handle it." Lena bound their wrists, her hands still shaking. The wounded man hissed in pain, but didn't resist. The second man just stared at the floor, defeated. When she finished, Caleb gestured with the rifle. "Outside, both of you." "I'm bleeding here," the wounded man protested, "and you'll bleed more if you don't move." They stumbled outside into the pre-dawn darkness. 3 horses stood tied to the porch rail, Caleb's and 2 others that must have belonged to the rustlers. A 4th horse stood nearby with a body draped over the saddle, motionless. "Is he dead?" Lena whispered. "Better be, after what he tried." Caleb's voice was flat, empty of emotion. "Sit," he ordered the 2 bound men, gesturing to the ground near the porch steps. They sat. Caleb kept the rifle on them while he looked at Lena properly for the first time. His expression shifted, still hard, still dangerous, but something else underneath, something that might have been fear. "You're sure you're not hurt?" "I'm sure." Lena's voice came out smaller than she intended. They said you hit your head." "I did." He touched the gash carefully. "Caught me by surprise while I was checking their camp. 3rd one got away, headed south, probably won't stop running till he hits Colorado." He looked at the bound men. These 2 decided to double back, see what they could steal before clearing out. "Didn't expect to find you here." The wounded man spat blood. "We didn't know Voss had himself a woman. Thought the place was empty." "So that makes it all right?" Caleb's voice went dangerously quiet. "Breaking into someone's home?" "We were just looking for supplies. You were looking to rob me blind and you know it." Caleb glanced at the dead man on the horse. "Your friend there tried to shoot me in the back. How's that for supplies?" Nobody answered. Lena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how cold it was. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her hollow and shaky. Her shoulder throbbed where she'd fired the rifle. She'd probably have a bruise. Her hands were scraped from fighting for the gun. But she was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she was alive. "We need to get them to town," Caleb said. "Marshall will want to question them about the rustling. Now?" "Sun'll be up in an hour. I'll load these 2 on their horses, tie them secure. You can ride with me." He paused, studying her face. "Unless you'd rather stay here." Lena looked at the cabin, the door hanging crooked from when Caleb had kicked it in, the bullet hole in the wall from her wild shot, the poker still lying on the floor where she'd dropped it. The place that had started to feel like home now felt contaminated, violated. "I'll come with you," she said. They left within the hour. Caleb tied the 2 living rustlers to their saddles with enough rope to make escape impossible, then secured the dead man more carefully. Lena climbed onto Caleb's horse, sitting behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist. "Hold tight," he said. It's rough country in the dark. They rode slowly, Caleb leading the other horses in a grim procession. Lena pressed her face against his back and tried not to think about what had almost happened, tried not to see the moment the gun had pointed at her, the absolute certainty that she was about to die. But she couldn't stop shaking. "You did good back there," Caleb said after a while, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Shooting Jack. That took courage." "I was terrified." "Being scared doesn't mean you weren't brave." He was quiet for a moment. "Most people would have frozen or begged. You fought." Lena thought about that. She had fought. Not well, not effectively, but she'd fought. A month ago, she would have done exactly what he said, frozen, begged, waited for someone to save her. But she'd changed. The frontier had carved away the parts of her that were too soft to survive and left something harder behind. She wasn't sure if that was good or not, but it had kept her alive. The sun was rising by the time they reached Prescott. The town looked different in the early light, less hostile, more tired, like it was surprised to see another day. Caleb rode straight to the marshal's office and dismounted, helping Lena down before pounding on the door. Deputy Marshal Graves answered, already half-dressed, his hand on his gun. His eyes widened when he saw the bound men in the corpse. "What the hell happened?" "These are your rustlers," Caleb said flatly. "Or 3 of them anyway. 4th one ran. They tried to rob my place. One of them's dead because he tried to kill me. The other 2 assaulted Miss Hart when she was alone in the cabin." Graves looked at Lena, her torn clothes, her wild hair, the bruises already forming on her arms. His expression hardened. "Bring them inside," he said. They hauled the rustlers into the office. The wounded man was fading, his face pale from blood loss. Graves took one look at him and sent his deputy running for the doctor. "You want to press charges?" he asked Lena. "What charges?" "Attempted robbery, assault, attempted murder, if you want to push it." Graves pulled out a form and a pencil. "They broke into your home, threatened you with violence. That's serious crimes." Lena looked at the 2 men slumped in chairs, defeated and pathetic. A month ago, she would have wanted them hanged. Now she just wanted them gone. "I want them in jail," she said. "I want to know they can't come back." "That I can guarantee." Graves started writing. "Rustling alone carries a prison sentence. Add in the rest and they're looking at years, maybe hanging for the murder charge, if the judge is feeling harsh." The wounded man made a sound of protest. Graves ignored him. They spent the next hour giving statements. Caleb describing the confrontation at the rustler camp, Lena recounting the attack in the cabin. Every word felt like reliving it, and by the end, Lena was exhausted, wrung out, barely able to stand. Caleb noticed. He always noticed. "We're done here," he told Graves. "You know where to find us if you need anything else." "Hold on." Graves looked at Lena. "Miss Hart, you sure you want to go back out there after what happened?" Which Lena understood what he was really asking, whether she felt safe returning to an isolated ranch with a man she barely knew, whether she wanted protection from the law. She looked at Caleb. His face was still bloody from the head wound, his clothes torn and dirty, his eyes exhausted. He'd been hit from behind, probably knocked unconscious, and he'd still found a way to track down the men who'd attacked him. He'd kicked through his own door to save her. He'd been willing to kill for her. "I'm sure," she said. Graves nodded slowly. "All right then. You two be careful." They walked out into the morning sunlight. The town was waking up, smoke from chimneys, someone opening the mercantile, the sound of hammering from the direction of the half-built church. Normal life continuing like nothing had happened. Caleb untied his horse. "We should get supplies while we're here, restock what they broke into. I need to sit down first." He looked at her properly, really looked, seeing past the brave front she'd been maintaining. "You need rest. I need to not be standing. Come on." He led her to Mrs. Chen's boarding house. The old woman took one look at them and started fussing in rapid Cantonese, pulling them inside, directing Caleb to a chair while she examined Lena for injuries. "I'm fine," Lena protested. "Just tired." Mrs. Chen said something sharp in Cantonese, probably calling her a liar, and disappeared into the kitchen. She returned with hot tea and something that might have been soup, forcing both of them to eat. Caleb submitted to her ministrations with surprising patience, letting her clean the wound on his head and bandage it properly. When she turned to Lena, he said, "I'll go get supplies. You stay here and rest." "I can help." "Stay here. Please." The please was what convinced her. Caleb rarely asked for anything, and even more rarely said please. If he was asking, it meant he was worried. "All right," Lena said. He left. Mrs. Chen made Lena drink more tea, some herbal mixture that tasted like dirt, but made the shaking in her hands finally stop. Then she pointed to a room upstairs. "Sleep," she said in accented English. "You look like ghost." Lena didn't argue. She climbed the stairs to the small room, lay down on the bed without even removing her boots, and fell immediately into unconsciousness. She woke to darkness and the sound of voices downstairs. Panic surged before she remembered where she was, what had happened. She sat up slowly, her body aching like she'd been beaten. The clock on the wall said 8 in the evening. She'd slept for almost 12 hours. The voices continued, Caleb and Mrs. Chen, speaking in low tones. Lena stood carefully and made her way downstairs. They both looked up when she appeared. Mrs. Chen immediately started toward the kitchen, muttering about dinner. Caleb stayed seated at the table, watching Lena with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You should have woken me," she said. "You needed sleep." "So did you." "I'm used to it." Lena sat down across from him. The table was covered with supplies, flour, coffee, ammunition, other necessities, more than they'd needed to replace what was stolen. Caleb had been busy. Mrs. Chen returned with food, rice, vegetables, something that might have been chicken. She set it down with the air of someone who would not tolerate refusal. They ate in silence, both too tired for conversation. Finally, Mrs. Chen cleared the plates and gave Caleb a long look. "You stay tonight, both of you. Too late for writing." "We should get back. Stay." It wasn't a request. Mrs. Chen pointed upstairs. "2 rooms. You rest. Morning is soon enough for going home." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but even he knew better than to fight Mrs. Chen when she'd made up her mind. "Yes, ma'am." Lena took the same room as before. She washed with water from the basin, trying to scrub away the feeling of those men's hands on her, the memory of the gun pointed at her head. But some things didn't wash off. She was standing at the window, looking out at the dark street, when there was a soft knock on her door. "It's me," Caleb said. Lena opened the door. He stood in the hallway, still wearing his torn, dirty clothes, looking like he hadn't slept in days, which he probably hadn't. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." "Neither do you." He almost smiled. "Fair point." He hesitated, like he was trying to find words that didn't come easy. "I'm sorry for leaving you alone, for not being there when they came. You couldn't have known. I should have. Should have brought you with me, or stayed at the ranch, or—" He stopped, frustrated. "I should have protected you better." Lena looked at this man who'd saved her life, who blamed himself for not doing it sooner, who carried guilt like other people carried water. "You did protect me," she said quietly. "You taught me to shoot, to fight, to stand up instead of breaking down." She paused. "And you came back. When it mattered most, you came back." "Not soon enough. Soon enough that I'm still alive." They stood in the doorway, the space between them heavy with things neither knew how to say. Finally, Caleb nodded once. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll head back tomorrow." He turned to leave. "Caleb." He stopped. "Thank you for everything." This time he did smile. Small, tired, but real. "You're welcome." He left her standing there, and Lena realized with sudden clarity that something had shifted between them. They weren't employer and employee anymore, weren't strangers connected only by a dead woman's memory. They were something else now, something she didn't have a name for yet, but it felt important. It felt real. And for the first time since coming to Wyoming, Lena thought maybe, just maybe, she'd found what she'd been running toward all along. The next morning, they rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence. The sun was bright, the air cold but clear, and the landscape rolled past like it always had, indifferent to human drama, unchanged by violence or fear. When the cabin came into view, Lena felt her stomach tighten. The door was still broken. The blood was probably still on the floor. The memory of what had happened would be everywhere. Caleb must have sensed her hesitation because he said, "We'll fix the door first thing. Clean everything up. Make it right again." "What if I can't forget?" "You won't forget. That's not how it works." He pulled his horse to a stop and looked at her seriously. "But you'll get past it. You're stronger than you think." "How do you know?" "Because you're still here, still choosing to stay." He dismounted and held his hand up to help her down. "That takes strength most people don't have." They spent the rest of the day putting the cabin back together. Caleb repaired the door, replacing the broken hinges and frame. Lena scrubbed the blood from the floor and wall, working until her hands were raw. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt purposeful, like they were both processing what had happened. That night, Caleb made dinner while Lena sat by the fire, exhausted. When he handed her a plate, their fingers brushed, and the contact felt electric. "You should take Charlotte's room," he said suddenly. Lena looked up, startled. "What?" "It's bigger, warmer. You deserve better than that closet you've been sleeping in." "But it's her room. She's not using it." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Lena heard the effort it took to say those words. "And you need space, after everything." Lena thought about Charlotte's empty room, the letters hidden under the bed, the ghost that had been haunting them both. Maybe it was time to let that ghost rest. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She moved her few belongings that night. The room still felt strange, like she was trespassing. But Caleb was right. It was bigger, warmer, with a window that looked out on the mountains instead of the yard. She found the box of letters under the bed where she'd left it. This time she didn't hide from Caleb. She brought it out to the main room and set it on the table. "I found these," she said, "the day you went to check on the rustlers." Caleb looked at the box without touching it. "I know. I heard you in there. Why didn't you say anything?" "Didn't seem like my business what you did in her room." He paused. "Are you going to read them?" "Do you want me to?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached out and opened the box, pulling out one of the letters at random. His handwriting stared back at them, neat and careful, addressed to a woman who'd never read his words. "I loved her," he said quietly. "Or I thought I did. Maybe I just loved the idea of not being alone." He set the letter down. "But she left, and she never came back, and eventually I had to accept that whatever we had, it wasn't enough to make her stay." Lena thought about Charlotte, restless, romantic, always searching for something just out of reach. "I don't think it was about you." "No?" "She ran from everything, from Boston, from our family, from expectations she couldn't meet. She probably ran from here for the same reason." Lena touched the letters gently. "Some people don't know how to stay. And you?" The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Lena thought about Marcus, about Boston, about the life she'd fled. She thought about the last few weeks, the work, the cold, the terror of nearly dying, the slow, steady realization that she'd found something here worth keeping. "I'm learning," she said. Caleb nodded slowly. Then he took the box of letters and walked to the fireplace. Lena watched as he fed them one by one into the flames, watching years of unanswered longing turn to ash. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I'm sure." The last letter caught fire, the paper curling and blackening. "She's gone, has been for 2 years, time to stop writing to ghosts." They stood together watching the fire burn, and Lena felt something release in her chest. Charlotte's shadow had been hanging over everything, over the ranch, over Caleb, over Lena's reasons for coming here. But maybe it was time to step out of that shadow, to stop living in the past and start building something new. "I'm glad I came here," Lena said softly. Caleb looked at her, his smoke-colored eyes reflecting the firelight. "So am I." It wasn't a declaration, it wasn't a promise, but it was honest and real, and more than either of them had been willing to say before. The fire burned lower, the night grew deeper, and somewhere between the ashes of old letters and the silence of new understanding, something began that neither of them had planned. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. The days after the fire blurred together in a way that felt both comfortable and dangerous. Lena woke each morning in Charlotte's room, her room now, and found herself listening for the sounds of Caleb moving through the cabin. The creak of the floorboards, the scrape of the stove door, the quiet efficiency of someone who'd lived alone so long he'd forgotten how to make noise. She'd lie there in the dark, knowing she should get up, knowing there was work waiting. But for those few stolen minutes, she'd just listen and feel something warm settle in her chest that had nothing to do with the blankets. It scared her more than the rustlers had. One morning in early January, she came out to find Caleb standing at the window, his coffee cup forgotten in his hand. Snow was falling again, thick, heavy flakes that turned the world white within minutes. "How bad?" Lena asked. "Bad enough." He didn't turn around. "Could be 3 days, could be a week. We've been through storms before." "Not like this one." He finally looked at her, and his expression was serious. "Temperature's already dropping. This is the kind of weather that kills cattle. Kills people too, if they're stupid about it." Lena moved to stand beside him. The snow was already ankle-deep and building fast. The barn was barely visible through the white curtain. "What do we do?" "Get the stock secured. Bring in extra firewood. Fill every container we have with water before the pump freezes solid." He drained his coffee in one swallow. "And then we waited out." They worked through the morning in controlled urgency. Caleb moved the cattle as close to the barn as possible, setting up windbreaks with whatever materials he could find. Lena hauled water until her arms ached, filled the wood box to overflowing, checked and rechecked their food supplies. By noon, the world had disappeared. The wind picked up, driving the snow horizontal, making it impossible to see more than a few feet. Caleb came back from a final check on the livestock, his face red with cold, ice crystals clinging to his eyebrows. "That's it," he said. "We're locked in until it passes." Lena looked at the door he'd just barred shut and felt the weight of isolation settle over them like another blanket. Just the two of them. The cabin, the storm, and no escape. The first day wasn't so bad. They stayed busy with small tasks, Caleb mending tack, Lena organizing the pantry, both of them avoiding the growing awareness that they were trapped together with nothing but time and proximity. That night, they sat by the fire after dinner, and Caleb did something unexpected. He pulled out a deck of cards. "You know how to play poker?" he asked. Lena stared at him. In all the weeks she'd been here, she'd never seen him do anything remotely recreational. "No." "I'll teach you." They played for matchsticks, worthless stakes that somehow made the game more serious. Caleb was patient, explaining the rules, watching her fumble through hands with the kind of focus he usually reserved for reading weather signs. "You're terrible at bluffing," he said after she lost the 5th hand in a row. "I'm terrible at lying in general." "That's not a bad thing." "It is in poker." "Maybe." He dealt another hand. "But it's refreshing in most other things." Lena looked at her cards, a pair of 3s and nothing else worth keeping. "Is that why you let me stay? Because I was honest?" Caleb considered this while studying his own hand. "I let you stay because you needed somewhere to go, and because Charlotte asked me to take care of her family." He discarded 2 cards, drew 2 more. "I kept you because you worked hard and didn't quit when it got difficult." "And now?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Caleb looked up from his cards, his eyes finding hers across the table. "Now," he said quietly, "I keep you because I want to." The fire crackled, the wind howled. The space between them felt charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Lena laid down her cards. "I fold." Smart move, but they both knew they weren't talking about poker anymore. The second day, the storm intensified. The wind hit the cabin like something alive and angry, making the whole structure shudder. Snow built up against the door until Caleb had to dig them out just to check on the barn. He came back covered in white, his face grim. "Lost 2 calves. Found them frozen in a drift." Lena's chest tightened. She'd helped birth one of those calves, had watched it stumble around on new legs, learning to walk. "I'm sorry. Part of ranching." His voice was flat, controlled. "You lose animals." It's just how it is. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched. Every loss mattered, even when he pretended it didn't, especially when he pretended it didn't. "Sit down," Lena said. "I'll make coffee." He sat. She made coffee strong enough to strip paint the way he liked it, and brought him a cup. Their fingers touched when he took it, and this time neither pulled away quickly. "Thank you," he said. "It's just coffee." Not just for the coffee. Lena sat down across from him, cradling her own cup. For what then? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, looking into his coffee like it held answers. For staying. For not running when things got hard. For... He stopped, searching for words. For making this place feel less empty. Lena's throat went tight. "I didn't do anything. You did everything." He looked up at her, and the rawness in his expression made her breath catch. "I've been alone here for 3 years. Told myself I liked it that way, that it was easier, but then you showed up and..." He stopped, shaking his head. "And what?" Lena asked softly. "And now I can't remember why I thought alone was better." The confession hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Lena knew she should say something, should acknowledge what he was offering. But the words stuck in her throat because admitting she felt the same meant admitting she'd stopped running, meant accepting that this place, this man, this impossible life had become home, and homes could be lost. She knew that better than anyone. "Caleb," she started, but he was already standing, already retreating. "I should check the stock again. It's barely been an hour. Still should check." He was gone before she could argue, disappearing into the storm like he was running from something more dangerous than the cold. Lena sat alone by the fire and wondered when everything had gotten so complicated. The third day they barely spoke. The storm still raged, but the silence inside the cabin was worse than the howling wind. Caleb threw himself into unnecessary tasks, reorganizing equipment, inventorying supplies they'd just inventoried, anything to avoid being still. Lena recognized the behavior because she'd done the same thing in Boston. Stay busy, don't think, don't feel. It was easier to work yourself into exhaustion than face what was actually happening. That night she found him in the barn, checking on cattle that didn't need checking. The lantern light cast shadows across his face, making him look older, more tired than he should. "You're avoiding me," she said. He didn't deny it. Seemed like the smart thing to do. "Why?" "You know why." Lena moved closer, her boots crunching on the straw-covered floor. "Because you told me the truth? Because you admitted you don't want to be alone anymore?" "Because it's a mistake." He turned to face her, and his expression was harder now, more controlled. "You should go back east. Find some nice man, live a civilized life, not waste yourself out here. That's not your choice to make. Maybe not. But I can choose not to be the reason you stay somewhere you don't belong." The words hit like a slap. "You think I don't belong here?" "I think you came here running from something, and eventually you'll realize you should have kept running." Lena's hands clenched. "You don't know anything about why I came here. Then tell me. Why? So you can use it as another reason to push me away?" They stood facing each other in the dim barn, the cattle shifting restlessly around them, sensing the tension. Caleb's face was a mask, but his eyes betrayed him. They held the same fear Lena felt, the same desperate hope that they were both trying to deny. "I was engaged," Lena said finally, the words coming hard, "to a man named Marcus Whitmore. Banking heir, Boston elite. Everything a woman was supposed to want." She laughed, bitter. "I left him at the altar, ran away 3 hours before the wedding. Destroyed my family's reputation. Made myself unmarriageable in every social circle that matters." Caleb's expression didn't change. "Why?" "Because I couldn't breathe, because every day with him felt like drowning slowly, because he touched me like I was property he'd already purchased." Her voice shook. "Because I wanted to feel something real, even if it hurt, even if it meant losing everything." "And did you? Lose everything?" "Yes." Lena met his eyes. "And I'd do it again. Because everything I lost wasn't worth keeping." The silence stretched. Then Caleb said very quietly, "He'll come looking for you eventually. Men like that always do. Maybe." And when he does, then I'll deal with it. Lena took a step closer. But I'm not running anymore. Not from him. Not from this. Not from you. Caleb's mask cracked. Lena, I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But pushing me away won't make it hurt less when I leave. It'll just make us both miserable in the meantime. You don't understand. I understand that you lost Charlotte, and it broke something in you. I understand that you're terrified of caring about someone again, because what if they leave? What if they die? Lena's voice softened. But I'm not Charlotte. I'm not leaving, not unless you force me to. Caleb looked at her like she was something impossible, something he'd stopped believing in. Then he closed the distance between them in 2 strides and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't practiced or polite or any of the things the kisses in her old life had been. It was desperate and real and tasted like fear and hope mixed together. Lena kissed him back, her hands fisting in his coat, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. This is a mistake, he said, but his hands were still on her waist, still holding her like he couldn't let go. Probably. I'm not good at this, at being with someone. Neither am I. I can't promise. Don't. Lena put her fingers over his lips. Don't promise anything. Just be here. Right now. That's enough. He kissed her again, softer this time, like he was learning a language he'd forgotten. Then he took her hand and led her back to the cabin. The storm still raged outside, but inside something else was building, something that had been forming since the first day Lena arrived maybe. Or maybe since the moment Caleb had taught her to shoot, or stood beside her in a blizzard, or looked at her like she was worth saving. They barely made it through the door before they were kissing again, stumbling toward the fireplace, shedding layers of winter clothing. Lena's fingers fumbled with the buttons of Caleb's shirt while his hands mapped her waist, her ribs, her face, with a kind of wonder that made her heart ache. Are you sure? He asked against her mouth. Yes. Lena, I'm sure. They made love on the rug in front of the fire, clumsy and urgent, and absolutely nothing like Lena had imagined her first time would be. It hurt more than she expected. It was over faster than seemed fair. And it was perfect anyway, because it was real and honest and completely theirs. Afterward, they lay tangled together under a blanket Caleb had pulled from somewhere, watching the fire burn down to coals. Lena's head rested on his chest, rising and falling with his breathing. His hand traced lazy patterns on her back. I should have, Caleb started. Don't apologize. I wasn't going to apologize. I was going to say I should have done that weeks ago. Lena smiled against his skin. Why didn't you? Because I'm an idiot. True. He laughed, actual laughter, low and rough from disuse. Lena realized she'd never heard him laugh before. She wanted to hear it again. What happens now? She asked quietly. I don't know. It was the most honest answer he could have given. Neither of them knew what this meant, what it would become. They were 2 broken people who'd found each other in the middle of nowhere, and that didn't guarantee anything except more complications. But lying there in the firelight, listening to the storm rage outside, Lena couldn't bring herself to regret it. For the first time in her life, she'd done something purely because she wanted to, with no thought to consequences or propriety or what came next. It felt like freedom. They eventually moved to Caleb's room, larger than Lena's, with a bed that didn't creak quite as much. They made love again, slower this time, learning each other in the darkness. Caleb whispered her name like a prayer or a confession. Lena held him like he might disappear if she let go. And for those few hours, the world contracted to just them. 2 bodies, 2 hearts. 2 people trying to figure out how to be less alone. Lena woke before dawn, Caleb's arm heavy across her waist. She lay still, listening to his breathing, trying to memorize the feeling of this moment before reality crashed back in. Because reality would crash back in. It always did. She thought about Marcus, whether he was still looking, whether he'd given up, whether he'd somehow track her here. She thought about the ranch, the brutal work, the isolation, the likelihood that one bad season could destroy everything. She thought about Caleb, closed off and damaged, carrying guilt like other men carried water, possibly incapable of truly letting anyone in. She should have been terrified. Instead, She felt calm. Caleb stirred, pulling her closer in his sleep. Lena closed her eyes and let herself have this. One perfect moment before everything got complicated again. The storm broke near noon. They woke to sudden silence, the kind that feels loud after days of constant wind. Caleb got up and opened the door to reveal a world transformed. Snow reached nearly to the porch roof. The barn was buried to the eaves. Everything was white, pristine, unmarked. "Well, Wiki," Caleb said, "this'll take some digging." They spent the day working in companionable silence, carving paths through the snow, checking on livestock, assessing damage. They lost 4 more cattle, found 2 others on the verge of freezing, and managed to save them. The chicken coop had partly collapsed again. Lena was starting to think that Coop was cursed. They didn't talk about what had happened between them. Didn't acknowledge the shift. They just worked, and occasionally their hands would brush or their eyes would meet, and something electric would pass between them before they both looked away. That night, after dinner, Lena started toward Charlotte's room out of habit. Caleb caught her hand. "Stay," he said simply. So she did. They fell into a new rhythm after that. Days spent working the ranch, nights spent in each other's arms. It wasn't the romance Lena had read about in books. There were no grand declarations, no promises of forever. Just 2 people finding comfort in proximity, in touch, in the simple fact of not being alone. But complications came anyway. They always did. One morning, about a week after the storm, Lena woke feeling wrong. Her stomach churned. The room spun when she sat up. She barely made it outside before she was sick in the snow. Caleb found her there, pale and shaking. "You all right?" "Fine. Just something I ate, probably." But it happened again the next day, and the day after that. Lena knew what it meant. She'd helped her mother through enough social pregnancies to recognize the signs. But she pushed the knowledge away, refused to think about it, threw herself into ranch work until she was too exhausted to worry. Caleb noticed, of course. He noticed everything. But he didn't ask, and Lena didn't tell. And they both pretended everything was fine, until the morning she fainted while feeding the chickens. She came to with Caleb's face hovering over hers, his expression carved from stone. "How long?" he asked. "I don't know what. Don't lie to me. How long have you known?" Lena looked at him, at the fear in his eyes, the anger, the guilt already settling in like an old friend. "A week, maybe more." He stood up, pacing. We should have been more careful. We were barely careful at all." "That's not funny." "I'm not laughing." Caleb stopped, his back to her. "What do you want to do?" The question hit harder than expected. What did she want? A month ago, pregnancy would have been a disaster, proof of ruin, unmarriageable, socially destroyed. But that was the old Lena, the one who cared what Boston society thought. This Lena was different. "I want to keep it," she said quietly. Caleb turned around slowly. "You're sure?" "Are you asking if I'm sure I'm pregnant, or sure I want to keep it?" "Both. Yes to both." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he knelt down beside her, taking her hands in his. "Then we'll figure it out." "We? You think I'd let you do this alone?" "I don't know what I think anymore." Caleb's jaw clenched. "I'm not him. The man you left in Boston. I'm not going to abandon you." "I didn't say—" "You didn't have to." He squeezed her hands gently. "But I need you to understand something. I'm not good at this. At being what people need. I failed Charlotte. I'll probably fail you too, but I'm going to try." Lena felt tears prick her eyes. Stupid hormonal tears that she couldn't quite control. "That's all I'm asking." They sat together in the snow and the chicken feed, holding hands like children, trying to figure out how to build something neither of them knew how to build. That night, lying in bed, Caleb's hand rested on her still flat stomach. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Me too." "What if I'm a terrible father? What if I'm a terrible mother?" He almost smiled. "Then we'll be terrible together." "That's not very reassuring." "I know." They lay in the darkness, and Lena tried to imagine the future, a child, a family. a life she'd never planned for but was somehow building anyway. It should have terrified her, and it did. But underneath the fear was something else, something that felt suspiciously like hope. Then Caleb said very quietly, "We should get married." Lena's heart stopped. "What?" "It's the right thing to do, for the child, for you." "For me?" "So you're not, so people don't," he struggled with the words. "So you're protected, respectable." Lena sat up, pulling away from him. "Is that really why? Or is it guilt? Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters." She could hear her voice rising but couldn't stop it. "I don't want you to marry me because you feel obligated, because you think you failed Charlotte and now you're trying to make up for it by doing right by me." Caleb sat up too, his face hard. "That's not, isn't it? Be honest. If I wasn't pregnant, would you be asking?" The silence was answer enough. Lena stood up, grabbing her nightdress, suddenly desperate to be anywhere but here. "I won't be your second chance at redemption. I won't be the woman you marry out of guilt. Lena, I'm going to Charlotte's room. It's your room. Tonight, it's not." She left before he could argue, closing the door between them like it meant something, like distance could undo what had already been done. In Charlotte's room, her room, Lena lay in the dark and tried not to cry. She'd left Boston to escape a marriage based on obligation, on what was proper and expected. She wasn't about to walk into another one. Even if she loved him, especially because she loved him. The thought stopped her cold. Love. When had that happened? When had the gruff, damaged rancher become someone she couldn't imagine living without? But it didn't matter. Love without trust was just another kind of trap. And she didn't trust that Caleb wanted her. Not the obligation, not the redemption, but her. She fell asleep still wearing her nightdress, cold and alone, while in the next room Caleb probably did the same. In the morning, she woke to an empty cabin. Lena found the note on the kitchen table, weighted down by Caleb's coffee cup. The handwriting was rushed, almost illegible. Gone to check North Pasture, back by afternoon. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of the argument. Just work, the way Caleb handled everything he didn't know how to fix. Lena crumpled the note and threw it in the fire. Then she made herself breakfast she couldn't eat and tried to figure out what the hell she was going to do. The pregnancy was real. The baby was coming, whether she was ready or not. And Caleb's proposal, however well-intentioned, had been exactly what she'd run from in Boston. Obligation dressed up as honor. Doing the right thing instead of the real thing. She wouldn't live like that again, not even for him. Especially not for him. She was washing dishes when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Her stomach dropped. The rustlers were in jail. Caleb was in the North Pasture, which meant whoever was coming wasn't expected. Lena grabbed the rifle, she kept it close now, always, and moved to the window. 3 riders, well-dressed, expensive horses, completely out of place against the rough Wyoming landscape. The man in front sat his saddle like he owned everything he surveyed. Marcus. Lena's blood turned to ice. Impossible. How had he found her? How had he tracked her to the middle of nowhere? To a ranch with no telegraph, no connection to anything resembling civilization? But there he was, dismounting like he was arriving at a garden party, brushing trail dust from his fine coat. The 2 men with him, hired muscle, probably, stayed mounted, hands resting casually near their guns. Marcus knocked on the door. 3 precise raps. Lena considered not answering, considered taking the rifle and disappearing out the back, running until she couldn't run anymore. But she was done running. She'd promised herself that. She opened the door with the rifle pointed at Marcus's chest. He didn't flinch, just smiled that same cold smile she'd seen 1,000 times across dinner tables and ballrooms. "Lena," he said, like they were old friends meeting for tea, "you're looking well. Frontier life agrees with you. How did you find me? Please, did you really think you could disappear completely?" He gestured to the cabin, the yard, the vast empty land beyond. "It took some effort, I'll admit. But money opens doors, loosens tongues. A woman matching your description bought a ticket to Cheyenne, from Cheyenne to Prescott. And in Prescott, well, small towns talk." Lena's hands tightened on the rifle. "You need to leave." "I don't think so. We have unfinished business. We have nothing. Marcus's smile turned sharp. You humiliated me, destroyed my reputation, made me a laughingstock in every club and parlor from here to New York. He took a step closer. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? The consequence is you don't get to marry me. That should be consequence enough. Oh, I don't want to marry you anymore, darling. That ship sailed when you decided to play at being a rancher's whore. His eyes flicked to her midsection. Could he tell? Impossible, but the way he looked at her suggested he knew. I just want you to come back and face what you've done. I'm not going anywhere with you. Then I'll have the sheriff arrest you. Theft, for starters. That money you took from your mother? That was mine. Part of the marriage settlement, which makes it stolen property. Lena's stomach clenched. She hadn't thought about that. Hadn't considered that taking her mother's money, money that had probably come from Marcus's family, could be construed as theft. You're lying. Am I? Do you want to test that theory in front of a judge? Marcus gestured to his companions. These gentlemen are here to escort you back to Boston. Peacefully, if possible. But they're prepared to use force if necessary. One of the hired men shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward his gun. Lena raised the rifle higher. Touch that weapon and I'll shoot you. No, you won't, Marcus said calmly. You're not a killer, Lena. You're a sheltered girl playing dress-up in your dead sister's clothes. He took another step. Now put down the rifle and come quietly. We can discuss your future on the train back. My future is here. Your future is wherever I say it is. You made a bargain, Lena. Our families had an agreement. You broke it. Now you pay. Lena's finger hovered over the trigger. She'd shot a man before. The rustler who'd broken into the cabin. She could do it again. Should do it, probably. Marcus was a threat, and the frontier had taught her how to deal with threats. But he was also right. She wasn't a killer, not in cold blood, not like this. Marcus saw the hesitation. His smile widened. That's what I thought. Now, the sound of a rifle cocking cut him off. Caleb's voice came from behind Marcus, cold as January ice. Take another step, and I'll put a bullet through your spine. Marcus froze. Slowly, carefully, he turned around. Caleb stood 20 feet away, his rifle trained on Marcus with the steady precision of someone who'd done this before. His face was expressionless, but his eyes held the kind of cold fury that made men reconsider their choices. You must be the rancher, Marcus said, recovering his composure quickly. Marcus Whitmore. Pleasure. Move away from the door. I'm simply here to retrieve my property. She's not property, and she's not going anywhere. Caleb's voice was flat, final. You and your boys have 5 seconds to get on your horses and ride out of here. One of the hired men spoke up. We've got legal right. Legal right doesn't mean much out here. What means something is who's holding the gun. And right now, that's me. Caleb's eyes never left Marcus. You want to test whether I'm willing to use it? Marcus studied Caleb with the same calculating look he'd probably used in 100 business negotiations, weighing odds, measuring risk, trying to find an angle. You'd start a war over some woman you barely know? Marcus asked. I'd end one. Right here, right now, if you don't leave. She's a thief, a criminal. I have every right. You have the right to leave my property before I put you in the ground. That's it. That's the only right you've got here. The hired men were getting nervous now. One of them edged his horse backward. They'd been paid to intimidate, maybe rough up a woman if needed. But facing down an armed rancher who looked ready to kill? That wasn't in their contract. Marcus saw it too, saw his advantage slipping. This isn't over, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I'll go to the marshal, the territorial judge. I'll have you arrested for threatening me. You do that. Tell them Caleb Voss threatened you. See how far it gets you. Caleb took a step forward. Meanwhile, you're leaving. Now. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Marcus straightened his coat with sharp, angry movements and walked back to his horse. He mounted smoothly, his face a mask of cold fury. You're making a mistake, he said to Lena. Both of you. Wouldn't be the first time, Caleb said. Marcus turned his horse. His hired men fell in behind him, clearly relieved to be leaving. They rode away at a controlled pace, too proud to run, too smart to stay. Lena and Caleb stood watching until they disappeared over the eastern ridge. Only then did Caleb lower his rifle. "How much of that did you hear?" Lena asked quietly. "Enough." He turned to look at her. "You stole money from him?" "From my mother. It was her jewelry money. I didn't know it came from his family." "Did it?" "Probably. Everything in our house came from his family eventually. That was the whole point of the marriage." Lena set the rifle down carefully. Her hands were shaking. "He's right. I'm a thief, a criminal. You're a survivor. That's generous." "No, it's accurate." Caleb moved closer. "You took what you needed to escape a bad situation. That's not theft. That's justice. The law might disagree." "The law's not standing in your kitchen. I am." He paused. "He'll come back. Men like that always do." "I know." "He'll bring more men. Maybe the marshal. Try to make it legal." "I know that too." Caleb studied her face. "So what do you want to do?" It was the same question he'd asked about the pregnancy. What do you want? Not what should you do, not what's proper or expected, just what she wanted. Lena looked around the cabin, the rough walls, the simple furniture, the life she'd built here through work and pain and choices that had nothing to do with propriety. She thought about Boston, about gaslights and society, and a cage made of silk and gold. Then she thought about Wyoming, brutal, honest, unforgiving. "I want to stay," she said. "I want to fight. Even if we lose? Even then." Caleb nodded slowly. Then he did something unexpected. He set down his rifle, crossed the space between them, and pulled her into his arms. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair, "for last night, for asking you to marry me like it was a business transaction, for being too stupid to just tell you the truth." "What truth?" He pulled back enough to look at her. "That I love you. That I've probably loved you since you stood in that blizzard helping me save cattle, too stubborn to quit even when you should have. That the pregnancy isn't why I want to marry you, it's just what finally made me brave enough to ask." Lena felt tears burning her eyes. "You love me." "I love you." "You're terrible at showing it." "I know. I'm terrible at a lot of things." His hands framed her face gently. "But I'm trying. And I'll keep trying. Even when I mess it up, even when I say the wrong thing or push you away or forget how to be human because I've been alone too long. Caleb, marry me, not because of the baby, not because of Marcus or propriety or doing the right thing. Marry me because you want to, because you love me too, even though I don't deserve it." Lena looked at him, really looked, at the scar on his temple from the rustlers, at the lines around his eyes from squinting into too many sunrises, at the fear and hope warring in his expression, like he was bracing for rejection, but couldn't help hoping anyway. She thought about Charlotte's letters, burned to ash, about the faded red wedding dress hanging in the closet, a ghost finally laid to rest, about all the ways love could fail, and the few brave ways it might succeed. "Ask me again," she said. "Ask me properly." Caleb's eyes widened slightly. Then, to her complete shock, he dropped to one knee right there in the kitchen, taking her hand in his. "Lena Hart," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you marry me? Will you stay here and build a life with me, even though it'll be hard and we'll probably argue and I'll mess things up more often than I get them right? Will you take a chance on me anyway?" Lena looked down at this impossible man, kneeling in a kitchen in the middle of nowhere, offering her nothing but honesty and hope. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." He stood and kissed her, deep and thorough, like he was sealing a promise. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lena said, "But we need to deal with Marcus first." "I know." "He'll bring charges, make trouble. Let him try." "Caleb, this is serious. I know it's serious." His jaw set. "But you're not going back there. I don't care what laws he threatens us with. I don't care if we have to leave Wyoming and start over somewhere else. You're not going back to him." Lena's chest tightened. "You'd leave the ranch? After everything you've built here?" "I'd leave anything for you." It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. It was also completely impractical and probably impossible. But standing there in Caleb's arms, Lena let herself believe it anyway. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Caleb rode into town and talked to Deputy Marshal Graves, explaining the situation. Graves listened, took notes, and promised to look into Marcus's claims. Stealing from family's tricky, he admitted, especially if there was a marriage contract involved. But if you're married to Voss, that complicates things. You'd be under his protection. His property, legally speaking. Lena bristled at the word property, but Caleb squeezed her hand. When can we make it legal? He asked. I can marry you right now if you want. Got the authority. They looked at each other. They'd planned to wait, to do it properly. But with Marcus circling like a wolf, waiting felt dangerous. Do it, Lena said. The ceremony took 5 minutes. No flowers, no music, no guests. Just Graves reading from a book of territorial law. Caleb and Lena speaking vows that felt both rushed and sacred, and Mrs. Chen appearing from nowhere to serve as witness, crying openly even though she pretended not to understand English when it suited her. By the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Graves said. He looked at Caleb. You can kiss her if you want. Caleb kissed her. It was brief, almost chaste, but his hand trembled when he cupped her face, and Lena knew he felt the weight of it, the commitment, the promise, the enormous gamble they were taking on each other. Congratulations, Arb, Graves said, handing them a marriage certificate. You're official. He paused. For what it's worth, I'll do what I can about Whitmore. But men with money have long arms. Watch your backs. They rode home married, and somehow the landscape looked different. Or maybe Lena just felt different, like she'd finally stopped running long enough to put down roots, even if those roots were in frozen ground. That night, lying in bed, their bed now, legally, Caleb's hand rested on her stomach again. You scared? He asked. Terrified. Me too. They lay in the darkness, two people who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other on purpose, trying to figure out how to be a family. Tell me something true, Lena said. Something you've never told anyone. Caleb was quiet for a long time, then, I'm glad Charlotte left. Not because I wanted her to leave, but because if she hadn't, you never would have come here. And I can't imagine that anymore. Not having you here. Lena's throat tightened. That's terrible. I know. I'm glad too. He pulled her closer, and they fell asleep like that, tangled together, holding on. Marcus came back a week later with the territorial judge and 2 deputies. They arrived at midday, official and legal, and absolutely certain of their authority. Caleb and Lena met them in the yard. Graves was with them too, looking apologetic but resolute. Mr. Voss, Mrs. Voss, the judge said, nodding to each of them. He was older, weathered, with eyes that had seen enough to be skeptical of everything. I'm Judge Warren. We need to discuss some allegations Mr. Whitmore has made. We're listening, Caleb said. He claims your wife stole money from his family, significant money, and that you're harboring a fugitive. She's my wife. I'm not harboring anyone. The marriage occurred after the alleged theft, which means it doesn't retroactively absolve the crime. Lena stepped forward. I took money from my mother's jewelry box, money I believed was hers to give. I didn't know it had come from the Whitmore family as part of a marriage settlement. Ignorance of ownership doesn't constitute innocence. Maybe not, but forced marriage doesn't constitute consent. Lena's voice was steady. Marcus Whitmore tried to buy me. When I refused to be bought, he decided to take me anyway. I'm guilty of theft. He's guilty of treating a human being like property. Judge Warren studied her for a long moment. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. The law doesn't see it that way. Marriage contracts are legal. Breaking them has consequences. Then the law is wrong. The judge's eyebrows rose. Beside him, Marcus smiled thinly. She admits to the theft, he said. That's all we need. Arrest her. One of the deputies moved forward. Caleb stepped between them and Lena, his hand on his gun. Don't, Graves warned quietly. She's not going anywhere, Caleb said. Mr. Voss, you're making this worse. I don't care. She's not going back to Boston. She's not going to jail. She's staying here. Judge Warren sighed. Son, I understand you want to protect your wife, but threatening law enforcement won't help your case. Neither will standing aside while they drag her away. Nobody's dragging anyone anywhere, yet. The judge looked at Lena. Mrs. Voss, how much money did you take? $73. And how much of that do you still have? Lena glanced at Caleb. They'd spent most of it on supplies, on the marriage license, on things they needed to survive. Maybe $20. Mr. Whitmore, is that correct? $73? Marcus's expression flickered. The exact amount is irrelevant. Answer the question. It was approximately that amount, yes. And you traveled all the way from Boston, hired these men, brought legal proceedings across territorial lines for $73? It's not about the money. It's about principle. Principle. Judge Warren's tone suggested he'd heard that before and didn't believe it then either. Let me tell you about principle, Mr. Whitmore. Principle says a woman who runs from a bad situation isn't a criminal. She's brave. Principle says a man who travels 1,000 miles to punish a woman for rejecting him isn't seeking justice. He's seeking revenge. Marcus's face went red. I'm not finished. The judge turned to Lena. Did you take this money with the intent to deprive Mr. Whitmore of his property? No. I took it with the intent to survive. And if you could repay it, would you? Yes. Judge Warren looked at Caleb. Can you cover the debt? It was a fortune for a struggling ranch. $20 was already stretching them thin. But Caleb didn't hesitate. Yes. Then here's my ruling. The judge pulled out a notebook and started writing. Mrs. Voss will repay the full $73 to Mr. Whitmore. She will be released from all claims of theft. The marriage contract between her and Mr. Whitmore is void due to her marriage to Mr. Voss, and Mr. Whitmore will leave Wyoming and not return. You can't, Marcus started. I can and I am. That's the law, Mr. Whitmore. You can appeal if you want, but I'm the only territorial judge for 300 miles, so good luck with that. He handed the ruling to Graves, who looked relieved. Marcus stared at the paper like it was a snake. This is absurd. She humiliated me, destroyed my reputation. Then you should have been a better man, one worth staying for. Judge Warren turned to his horse. We're done here. Deputies, we're heading back to town. They left Marcus standing in the yard, defeated and furious. He looked at Lena with such hatred it should have scared her. Instead, she felt nothing but pity. You'll regret this, he said quietly. The only thing I regret is wasting 3 years of my life on you. He flinched like she'd struck him. Then he mounted his horse and rode away, his shoulders stiff with injured pride. Lena watched him go and felt the last chain break. She was free. Really, truly free. Caleb's arm came around her waist. You all right? I will be. She leaned into him. We owe $73. I know. That's almost everything we have. I know that too. We might lose the ranch. Maybe. He kissed the top of her head. But we'll still have each other. It was a terrible plan, completely impractical. But standing there in the winter sunlight, Lena couldn't bring herself to care. They'd figure it out. They always did. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, like it wasn't sure Wyoming deserved the reprieve. The snow melted into mud, the mud dried to dust, and the world turned green in patches. Caleb worked brutal hours preparing for calving season, and Lena worked beside him despite the pregnancy that was starting to show. They were broke. The $73 to Marcus had cleaned them out completely. They lived on credit from the mercantile and the desperate hope that the cattle would sell high enough to cover their debts. But they were together, and somehow that made the struggle bearable. One evening in late April, Lena stood at the window watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick, strong, insistent, demanding to be noticed. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist as much as he could with the baby between them. What are you thinking? He asked. That Charlotte was right. This place is beautiful. Harsh, but beautiful. Like you. Lena laughed. I'm not beautiful. I'm huge and swollen and I can't see my own feet. You're beautiful. He turned her to face him. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You need to get out more. He smiled. Real smiles came easier now, like muscles he was relearning how to use. Maybe, but I'm not wrong. They stood together in the fading light, and Lena thought about all the choices that had led here. Running from Marcus, finding Charlotte's letter, coming to Wyoming, staying when she should have left, fighting when she should have surrendered. Every choice had been terrifying. Every choice had felt like a mistake while she was making it. But standing here now, in Caleb's arms, carrying his child, building a life that belonged to them alone, maybe the mistakes had been exactly right. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." It never got old hearing those words, or saying them. The baby came in early June, arriving with the same stubbornness her mother had shown her entire life. The labor was long and brutal and absolutely nothing like the polite deliveries Lena had heard about in Boston. Mrs. Chen came from town to help, and she was the only reason both Lena and the baby survived. When it was over, when Lena lay exhausted and triumphant with a tiny, screaming daughter on her chest, Caleb looked at them both with such naked awe that Lena started crying all over again. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's wrinkled and angry." "Perfect," he repeated. They named her Sarah, not after anyone in particular, just because they liked it. Sarah grew fast the way babies do, transforming from a screaming bundle into a person with opinions and demands. She had Caleb's eyes and Lena's stubborn chin, and absolutely no patience for anything she deemed unfair. "She's going to be trouble," Mrs. Chen said, visiting for the third time that month. "Strong girl, too strong, maybe." "Good," Lena said, watching Sarah grab at everything within reach. "The world needs strong girls." The ranch struggled through that first year. They lost more cattle than they could afford, had a barn roof collapse in a storm, dealt with disease and predators, and the endless grinding reality of trying to make a living from unforgiving land. But they survived. Slowly, painfully, they carved out something sustainable. Caleb's reputation spread: honest, hardworking, fair in his dealings. People started buying cattle from him specifically because they knew he wouldn't cheat them. The debts got paid down. The ranch stabilized. It would never make them rich, but it was theirs. One evening when Sarah was almost 2, Lena stood in the doorway watching her daughter chase chickens while Caleb pretended to chase her. The chickens were unimpressed. Sarah was delighted. Caleb was laughing, actual, full-bodied laughter that echoed across the valley. Mrs. Chen appeared beside Lena, seemingly from nowhere. "You look happy," she said. "I am happy." "Good, you deserve it." She paused. Charlotte deserved it too, but she was looking in wrong places. Lena glanced at her. "Did you know her?" Everyone knew her. Beautiful girl, restless, always wanting something more. Mrs. Chen watched Sarah stumble and get back up, determined. "You're different. You know how to be still." "I'm not still. I'm constantly working. Still inside." Mrs. Chen tapped her chest. "You know who you are. Charlotte never did." But it was the most anyone had said about Charlotte in months. Lena thought about her sister, the restless searching, the running, the letter that was never sent. She'd spent so long trying to understand Charlotte's choices, but maybe understanding wasn't the point. "I miss her," Lena said quietly. "Good. Missing means you loved. Loving means you're alive." Mrs. Chen patted her arm. "Now go. Your daughter is eating dirt." Lena ran out to stop Sarah from her latest culinary adventure. Caleb caught them both, swinging Sarah up onto his shoulders while she shrieked with delight. "She's fearless," he said. "She gets it from you." "She gets it from both of us." They walked back to the cabin together, Sarah babbling about chickens and dirt and things that only made sense to a 2-year-old. The sun was setting again, painting everything gold. That night, after Sarah was asleep and the evening chores were done, Lena and Caleb sat on the porch in the cool darkness. The stars were overwhelming, thousands of them, more than she'd ever seen in Boston, scattered across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Staying here? Choosing this life?" Lena thought about it honestly. About the work that never ended, the isolation, the constant struggle. About the life she'd left behind. Comfortable, cultured, completely wrong for who she actually was. "Never," she said. Not even on the hard days, especially on the hard days. She took his hand. The hard days mean we're doing something real, building something that matters. Caleb squeezed her fingers. I'm glad you came here, even if it was for the wrong reasons. Were they wrong? I came looking for my sister. Instead, I found myself. She looked at him. I found you. Best mistake you ever made. Best mistake I ever made. They sat in comfortable silence, and Lena thought about how strange life was, how the choices that felt like endings were actually beginnings, how running away could lead you exactly where you needed to be, how love wasn't always beautiful or easy or anything like the stories said, but it was real and honest and absolutely worth fighting for. Years passed. Sarah grew into a wild, fearless girl who could ride before she could read and had no patience for anything that kept her inside. A second child came, a boy they named Thomas, who was quieter than his sister but just as stubborn. The ranch grew slowly, steadily, into something viable. Lena learned to love the rhythms of frontier life, the hard work, the simple satisfactions, the way each season brought its own challenges and rewards. She learned that happiness wasn't the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. And she learned that family wasn't always the one you were born into. Sometimes it was the one you chose. The one you built from scratch, in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but hope and stubbornness and the absolute refusal to quit. One morning, when Sarah was 12 and already demanding to help with the cattle drives, Lena stood looking at the faded red wedding dress that still hung in the closet. She'd kept it all these years, this ghost of Charlotte's that had haunted them both. Should we get rid of it? Caleb asked, coming up behind her. No. Lena touched the fabric gently. It's part of our story, Charlotte's story. It deserves to stay. You think she'd be happy, knowing how things turned out? Lena thought about her sister, beautiful, restless Charlotte, who'd been searching for something she couldn't name. I think she'd be relieved, knowing she led me here, even if she couldn't stay herself. You think people can lead us to where we need to be even when they're lost themselves? I know they can. Caleb put his arms around her, and they stood looking at the dress that represented everything they'd lost and found. Outside, Sarah was yelling at Thomas about something, and Thomas was ignoring her the way only little brothers could. The cattle needed checking, the fence needed mending, the garden needed watering, life needed living, and they were living it, not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. Building something real in a place that demanded truth, creating a home not from what they'd been given, but from what they'd chosen. That night, lying in bed with Caleb's arm around her and the sound of Wyoming wind outside, Lena thought about all the versions of herself she'd been. The Boston debutante, the runaway bride, the struggling ranch hand, the mother, the wife. All of them were true. All of them had led here. Caleb? She said into the darkness. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For seeing me. For letting me stay. For choosing me even when I gave you every reason not to. He pulled her closer. You've got it backwards. You're the one who chose me. I'm just grateful you did. We chose each other. Yeah, we did. They fell asleep like that. Two people who'd found each other by accident and loved each other on purpose, building a life that was entirely their own. And somewhere in the darkness, if you listened close enough, you might have heard the wind carrying away the last of Charlotte's ghost, released finally, peacefully, into the endless Wyoming sky. Because some stories end so others can begin. Some people leave so others can arrive. Some ghosts need to rest so the living can finally be free. Lena had come to Wyoming running from one life and searching for another. She'd found both. And in finding them, she'd discovered something more important than either, the truth that home wasn't a place, or a person, or a promise. It was a choice you made every single day, to show up, to fight, to love, despite the fear and the risk and the absolute certainty that nothing was guaranteed. She'd chosen, and she'd keep choosing, for as long as the frontier would have her, for as long as Caleb would stand beside her, for as long as the story kept unfolding under the endless Wyoming sky. And that, despite everything, through everything, was enough.